The blazing Arizona sun hung low in the sky as Magnolia Winters gripped her worn leather satchel and stared at the imposing gates of the Broken Spur Ranch. Her throat felt as dry as the dusty road she'd traveled, but it wasn't just from the heat. Desperation had driven her here, to the last place she'd ever expected to find herself begging for work from a man she'd never met. The year was 1885, and the West was still wild enough to be dangerous for a woman alone. Magnolia had learned that lesson the hard way during her 3-week journey from Philadelphia. But she had no choice. Not after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts and a tarnished family name. She pushed open the heavy wooden gate and made her way up the path to the main house. It was a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and rocking chairs that spoke of evenings spent watching the sunset. Right now, all she could see was a possible salvation if the owner would hear her out. A tall man stepped out onto the porch, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "This is private property, madam," he called out, his voice deep and even. Magnolia straightened her spine. "I'm looking for work, sir. I was told in town that the Broken Spur might be hiring." He descended the steps slowly, and as he came into the light, Magnolia caught her breath. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a cloudless sky. His shoulders were broad, his stance confident. "Preston Blackwood," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I own this ranch." "Magnolia Winters," she replied, extending her hand as her mother had taught her. Though she suspected such formalities were rare out here, to her surprise, he took it, his calloused palm warm against her gloved one. "What kind of work are you looking for, Miss Winters?" "We don't typically employ ladies at the ranch," she swallowed hard. "I can cook, clean, mend, keep books. I'm a quick learner, Mr. Blackwood." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her travel-stained but clearly once fine dress, the determined set of her jaw, the spark of intelligence in her hazel eyes. "Only one position open," he said finally, his expression unreadable. "And I'll only offer it under one condition." "What condition?" she asked, heart hammering against her ribs. Preston Blackwood's gaze flickered to the setting sun, then back to her face. "Only if you'll marry me by sunset." Magnolia's mouth fell open. "I beg your pardon, you heard me, Miss Winters." "Marry me by sunset today or the job's not yours." That's preposterous," she sputtered. "I don't even know you." "Lot of women out here marry men they barely know," he replied with a shrug. "Got my reasons for asking, take it or leave it." Magnolia clutched her satchel tighter. The absurdity of his proposal warred with the reality of her situation. She had exactly $3.17 to her name. The hotel in town would cost her $1 a night, and then what? "Why would you propose marriage to a complete stranger?" she demanded. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Got a homestead claim that needs proving up. Government requirement says I need a wife living on the property. Deadline's tomorrow," he gestured toward the horizon. "So yes or no?" Magnolia's mind raced. A business arrangement then, not a real marriage, perhaps that made it slightly less insane. "Would it be a true marriage?" she asked, her cheeks heating despite her attempt at practicality. Something flickered in his eyes. "On paper, yes. In practice, we can negotiate terms." "I'll need my own room," she said quickly. "Done. And a fair wage for my work around the ranch." He nodded once. "Reasonable. And I want to know that I'm free to leave when, if circumstances change." Preston Blackwood's expression darkened slightly. "Marriage isn't something I take lightly, Miss Winters, even one of convenience, but I won't hold you against your will. We can draw up papers stating terms if that makes you feel better." Magnolia took a deep breath, scarcely able to believe what she was considering. "I'll need time to think." "No time," he said, gesturing again to the sinking sun. "Judge Wilson's in town today only. It's now or never." She closed her eyes briefly. What would her mother say if she could see her now, contemplating marriage to a stranger in exchange for room and board? But her mother wasn't here. No one was here to help her. "Very well, Mr. Blackwood," she said, opening her eyes and meeting his gaze steadily. "I accept your proposal." A look of surprise crossed his face, as if he hadn't actually expected her to agree. Then he nodded briskly. "Let's go then. Town's a 15-minute ride." He whistled sharply, and a ranch hand appeared with 2 horses, a powerful black stallion and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "Can you ride, Miss Winters?" Preston asked, already moving toward the stallion. "Yes," she lied. She'd had basic riding lessons as a girl, but nothing prepared her for the tall western saddle. Preston seemed to sense her hesitation. Without comment, he helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The intimacy of the touch startled her, a preview of what marriage, even in name, only might mean. They rode in silence, the enormity of what she'd agreed to weighing heavily on Magnolia's mind. The town of Copper Creek appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings stretched along a dusty main street. "Why me?" she finally asked as they approached the town. "Surely there are women here you could have asked." Preston kept his eyes forward. "Tried that. Local girls want love, not land. Widows want security, not work. You're desperate enough not to ask too many questions." His bluntness stung, but Magnolia couldn't deny the truth of it. "And what happens after we're married? After you secure your claim, we make it work," he said simply. "Or we don't, but I keep my promises, Miss Winters. You'll have a roof, food, and respect under my care." The judge's office was a small room above the general store. Judge Wilson was a rotund man with spectacles and a harried air about him. "Another one, Blackwood," he sighed when they entered. "This is the 3rd girl you've brought in a month." Magnolia froze, turning to stare at Preston. "The others changed their minds," Preston said quickly, shooting the judge a warning look. "This time it's happening." Judge Wilson shrugged and pulled out a ledger. "Names." The ceremony was brief and impersonal. Magnolia's hands trembled as she signed the marriage certificate. Preston's signature was bold and sure beneath hers. "You may kiss your bride," Judge Wilson said, already closing his book. Preston hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed the briefest of kisses to Magnolia's cheek. His lips were warm, his beard scratchy against her skin. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwood," the judge said, handing her the certificate. "May you fare better than his previous almost brides." Outside, the sun was a fiery ball touching the horizon. Preston helped her back onto her horse without meeting her eyes. "I think you owe me an explanation," Magnolia said as they began the ride back to the ranch. "Previous almost brides," Preston sighed heavily. "It's not what you think." 2 other women agreed to the arrangement, but both backed out before the ceremony. "Why?" He was silent for so long that Magnolia thought he wouldn't answer. Then one got a better offer from a shopkeeper. The other, he hesitated. "The other said she couldn't marry a man with my reputation." "And what reputation is that?" Magnolia asked, suddenly wary. "Some say I killed a man," he said flatly. "Some say I robbed a bank, some say worse. People talk, especially about a man who keeps to himself." "And did you kill someone?" Preston's eyes met hers, hard and challenging. "Would it matter now? You're already my wife." A chill ran down Magnolia's spine despite the evening heat. What had she done, for what it's worth? He added after a moment. "No, I never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first, and that was years ago during the war." The ranch came into view as dusk settled over the land. Lights glowed in the windows of the main house and the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed. "I should warn you," Preston said as they approached. "My foreman, Mike, won't take kindly to this arrangement. He thinks I'm a fool for trying to hold onto the north pasture." "Is that where the homestead is?" "The north pasture," Preston nodded. 160 acres of the best grazing land in the territory. My father tried to claim it 20 years ago but failed. I won't make the same mistake." As they dismounted in front of the main house, a door slammed and a burly man with a salt and pepper beard stormed toward them. "You actually did it," he demanded, looking Magnolia up and down with undisguised skepticism. "You married this city girl to keep your claim." "Watch your tone, Mike," Preston warned quietly. "This is my wife, Magnolia. You'll show her the respect that position deserves." Mike's expression softened slightly as he turned to Magnolia. "No offense meant, madam, just surprised is all. Welcome to Broken Spur." Magnolia nodded stiffly, unsure what to say. The reality of her situation was sinking in with each passing moment. "Get her things from town tomorrow," Preston told Mike. "Tonight she'll make do with what she has." He turned to Magnolia. I'll show you to your room." The main house was surprisingly comfortable inside, with solid furniture and touches that spoke of a woman's hand in the distant past, embroidered cushions, a china cabinet, landscape paintings on the walls. "My mother's things," Preston explained, catching her glance at a particularly fine porcelain figurine. "She died 10 years ago, my father 5 years before that." "I'm sorry," Magnolia said automatically. "My father passed recently as well." Preston nodded but didn't ask for details. He led her upstairs to a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed, dresser, and washstand. "This was my sister's room," he said, "before she married and moved to California." "You have a sister." Magnolia seized on this normal detail, two, both older, both gone east as soon as they could. His tone suggested there was more to that story, but he didn't elaborate. "Bathrooms down the hall, kitchens downstairs. You'll meet Martha in the morning. She cooks for the ranch hands." "I thought you said you needed someone who could cook," Magnolia said, frowning. "I do. Martha's getting on in years and her arthritis is bad. She needs help." He paused at the door. "Get some rest, Mrs. Blackwood. Tomorrow will be a long day." After he left, Magnolia sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing over her. She was married to a stranger. In the middle of nowhere. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she allowed herself to cry. Morning came too soon, the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch waking Magnolia before dawn. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining dresses, wishing desperately for more practical clothing. The kitchen was already busy when she made her way downstairs. An elderly woman with gnarled hands was kneading bread dough at a large table. "You must be the new Mrs. Blackwood," the woman said without looking up. "I'm Martha." About time that boy found himself a wife, though I'll admit I'm surprised by his choice. We're not," Magnolia stammered, then sighed. "It's complicated." Martha looked up then, her faded blue eyes sharp with understanding. "Always is, child. But you're here now, and that's what matters. You know how to make biscuits?" "Yes, but good. Start on those. Men will be in for breakfast in an hour." Thrown into work without further explanation, Magnolia found herself falling into a rhythm alongside Martha. The older woman was brusque but patient, showing Magnolia where everything was kept and explaining the daily routine. "Feed the hands at sunrise and sunset," Martha explained. "Preston takes coffee in his study at 6, breakfast whenever he comes in from morning chores. Likes his eggs over easy, bacon crisp, coffee strong. Does he have any other preferences I should know about?" Magnolia asked, trying to sound casual. Martha gave her a knowing look. "He's a good man, Mrs. Blackwood, keeps to himself, works hard, treats his people fair. Whatever arrangement you two have made, I suggest you give him a chance before you make up your mind about him." Before Magnolia could respond, the back door opened and Preston himself walked in. He'd clearly been working already, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms dusted with dark hair. "Morning," he said, nodding to both women. His eyes lingered on Magnolia for a moment. "Sleep well?" "Well enough, thank you," she replied formally. An awkward silence fell. Martha broke it by shoving a cup of coffee into Preston's hands. "Go on with you. Your breakfast will be ready when you are." After he left, Magnolia asked the question that had been bothering her since the previous evening. "Martha, what do you know about Preston's reputation in town?" Martha's hands stilled on the dough. "People talk, child, especially about a man who came back from the war changed, who keeps to himself, who turned down the attentions of every eligible woman in the county. But is any of it true, the things they say? Some, maybe, not in the way they mean it." Martha resumed kneading. "Preston Blackwood fought for the Union, came home to find his father dying and the ranch in debt. He's worked every day since to keep this place going, to build something his father could be proud of. If that makes him hard, well, life out here is hard." The ranch hands began filing in for breakfast soon after, eyeing Magnolia with curiosity but respectful distance. Mike, the foreman from the previous evening, gave her a gruff nod. "Mrs. Blackwood," he acknowledged. "Preston wants to see you in his study when you're done here." Magnolia found Preston in a small room off the main parlor, bent over account books. He looked up when she entered, gesturing for her to sit. We need to discuss terms, he said without preamble. As my wife, you're entitled to certain considerations. Such as? Magnolia asked, sitting stiffly in the chair across from him. A monthly allowance for personal items. Access to the ranch accounts for household expenses. Your own horse if you can ride. I can learn, she said. She hesitated, then added, I was good with my father's accounts. I could help with the books if you'd like. Interest flickered in his eyes. What did your father do? He was a merchant. Import and export mainly. She didn't add that his business had failed spectacularly, leaving her penniless. Preston seemed to consider this. Show me what you can do. He pushed the ledger toward her. Magnolia studied the neat columns of figures. Your cattle operation is profitable, but you're spending too much on grain, and these figures for the bunkhouse supplies seem high. Preston's eyebrows rose. Go on. For the next hour, they went through the accounts together. Magnolia pointed out areas where costs could be cut, while Preston explained the realities of running a ranch in this part of the territory. Water's always the issue, he explained, showing her a rough map. The north pasture has the best access to the creek, that's why it's worth fighting for. And that's where the homestead is, the one we're married for, he nodded. Government says I have to build a dwelling and live there with my family for 5 years to prove the claim. We'll ride out there tomorrow so you can see it. As they worked, Magnolia found herself relaxing slightly. Whatever else Preston Blackwood might be, he was clearly intelligent and knew his business. You surprise me, Mrs. Blackwood, he said finally, closing the ledger. Most women wouldn't take an interest in ranch finances. Most women wouldn't marry a stranger for a job, she replied dryly, the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Fair point. He stood. I need to check on the new calves. Would you like to come along? See more of the ranch. Surprised by the invitation, Magnolia agreed. Outside, Preston helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy. She's yours, he said, adjusting the stirrups for her. Every rancher's wife needs her own horse. The gesture, unexpected and thoughtful, caught Magnolia off guard. Thank you, she said softly. They rode through rolling grasslands dotted with cattle, Preston pointing out landmarks and explaining the operation of the ranch. Despite her limited riding experience, Magnolia found herself enjoying the outing, the open sky and vast landscape so different from Philadelphia's crowded streets. Over there, Preston said, pointing to a distant ridge. That's the edge of the north pasture, the homestead's about 2 miles beyond. It's beautiful, Magnolia admitted. I can see why you want to keep it. It's more than that, he said quietly. It's what my father always wanted, what he died trying to achieve. Tell me about him, Magnolia said, genuinely interested. Preston was silent for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. He came west in '49, not for gold but for land, met my mother in San Francisco, brought her here to build a life. He worked himself to death trying to make this ranch successful. His jaw tightened. The north pasture was his dream. He filed the claim 3 times, but something always went wrong, paperwork lost, surveyors bribed, deadlines missed. And now you're determined to succeed where he failed, Magnolia guessed. I owe him that much. Preston's gaze was fixed on the distant ridge. The last time he tried, he built a cabin, moved us all out there. We lived on that land for 2 years before a fire destroyed the cabin and most of our proof of residence. He never recovered from that setback. Magnolia was beginning to understand the man beside her a little better. So this marriage is practical, he finished. The government wants families settling the land, not single men. With a wife living on the property, my claim is much stronger. And if we hadn't married yesterday, what would have happened to your claim? I had until today to prove up or lose it, he said grimly. Someone else has been trying to file on the same parcel, man named Harlan Bates. He's got connections in the land office. And who is this Harlan Bates? Preston's expression darkened. Cattle baron from Texas. Wants to control all the water rights in the county. Already owns most of the land south of here. They returned to the ranch house as the sun was setting, Magnolia sore from the unaccustomed riding but oddly exhilarated. The day had given her a new perspective on her hasty marriage and the man who was now her husband. That evening, After a quiet dinner during which they discussed plans for the North Pasture homestead, Preston excused himself to his study. Magnolia was left alone in the parlor, exhaustion from the day's events finally catching up with her. She was nearly asleep in her chair when Preston returned, a small wooden box in his hands. "This was my mother's," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "If you're to be my wife, even just on paper, you should have a proper ring." Magnolia stared at the ring, then at Preston. "I couldn't possibly, please," he said quietly. "It would look right." Understanding his meaning that appearances mattered for their arrangement to work, Magnolia slowly extended her left hand. Preston carefully slid the ring onto her finger. "It fit surprisingly well. Thank you," she whispered, unexpectedly touched by the gesture. Preston nodded once, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Good night, Mrs. Blackwood." As promised, the next day they rode out to see the homestead property. The journey took most of the morning, winding through pastures and over rocky terrain until they crested a hill, and the North Pasture spread out before them. It was even more beautiful than Magnolia had imagined, a vast expanse of grass bordered by the silver ribbon of a creek, cottonwood trees creating patches of shade along the banks. "There," Preston said, pointing to a clearing near the creek where the frame of a small cabin stood partially completed. "That's our home for the next 5 years, at least on paper." "You've already started building," Magnolia observed, "been working on it for months." "Should be finished before winter." He dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "Come see." The cabin was simple but well constructed, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. Preston showed her where the kitchen would be, the sleeping area, the porch that would face the creek. "It's smaller than the main house," he said, almost apologetically, "but it meets the government requirements." "It's lovely," Magnolia said honestly. Will we really need to live here?" Preston leaned against a support beam. "Not full time. We need to establish residence, make improvements to the land. Weekend trips at first, then longer stays as the seasons permit." As they explored the property, Preston pointed out the boundaries, the best grazing areas, the places where the creek ran deepest. His knowledge of the land was intimate, his passion for it obvious. "You really love this place," Magnolia said as they sat by the creek, eating the lunch Martha had packed for them. "It's in my blood," he replied simply. "What about you? What did you love in Philadelphia?" The question caught her off guard. It was the first time he'd asked about her past. "Books," she said after a moment. "My father's library was extensive, and music, I played the piano." "We have a piano," Preston said. "At the main house, it was my mother's. No one's played it in years." Magnolia's eyes lit up. "Really? I'll show you when we get back." He hesitated, then asked, "Why did you leave Philadelphia, Magnolia? What brought you all the way out here?" She looked away, unsure how much to reveal. "My father died in debt. The creditors took everything. I had no other family, no prospects." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "I saw an advertisement in a newspaper about opportunities in the West. It seemed like my only option." Preston was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you." She looked up at him. "I know our marriage is just an arrangement, but I want you to know that I intend to work hard, to earn my keep." "Never doubted that," he said, studying her with those piercing blue eyes. "You're not the kind to take the easy path. If you were, you'd have married one of those Philadelphia gentlemen before your father's business failed." Magnolia stiffened. "How did you know his business failed? The way you talk about it, the fact that you're here." His expression softened slightly. "I don't judge you for it, Magnolia. We all do what we must to survive." On the ride back to the main ranch, they took a different route, climbing higher into the foothills. Preston wanted to show her a particular view, he said, one that his father had loved. The vista, when they reached it, was breathtaking, the entire valley spread out below them, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, the setting sun painting everything in gold and amber. "It's magnificent," Magnolia breathed. Preston nodded, his eyes on the landscape. "This is what I'm fighting for, not just land, but a legacy, something that will last beyond me." In that moment, with the golden light on his face and the passion in his voice, Magnolia saw Preston Blackwood clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the stern, mysterious rancher who had proposed an outrageous bargain, but as a man with dreams and determination, trying to honor those who came before him. Something shifted inside her, a subtle realignment of her perspective. They rode home in companionable silence as dusk settled over the land. True to his word, Preston showed her the piano that evening, a beautiful rosewood instrument in a corner of the parlor. "It hasn't been tuned in years," he apologized as Magnolia ran her fingers over the yellowed keys. Despite its neglect, the piano had a warm, rich tone. Magnolia played a simple melody, muscle memory guiding her fingers. When she finished, she looked up to find Preston watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You play beautifully," he said quietly. "I'm rusty," she demurred, "but thank you for letting me use it." "It's yours now," he said. "Everything here is yours as my wife." The words hung in the air between them, a reminder of their unusual situation. Magnolia felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "I'll arrange for it to be tuned," he added, breaking the moment. "Good night, Magnolia." As the days passed, Magnolia fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She worked alongside Martha in the kitchen, learned to ride properly with Preston's patient guidance, and began to know the ranch hands by name. She even started keeping the account books, discovering a satisfaction in bringing order to the ranch's finances. Preston remained something of an enigma, courteous but reserved, hardworking but private. He treated her with unfailing respect, never presuming on their marital status, always giving her space and independence. Yet Magnolia found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. The way his hands moved with sure confidence, whether breaking a horse or mending a fence. The rare smile that transformed his serious face. The quiet authority he commanded without raising his voice. They began riding out to the homestead cabin every weekend, working together to complete the structure. Preston taught her how to lay floorboards and chink logs, tasks she would never have imagined herself doing in her previous life. "You're a natural," he said one afternoon as they finished a section of wall, "not afraid to get your hands dirty." "Philadelphia society would be shocked," she laughed, wiping sweat from her brow with a dusty hand. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Society, I mean." Magnolia considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things: books, music, conversation about art and politics." She looked around at the half-built cabin, the wild beauty of the land. "But I don't miss the artifice, the constant pretending. That money matters more than character, that appearances are everything." She met his eyes. "Out here, people are judged by what they do, not who their family is or how much they own." "Some would say I married you for what I could get," Preston pointed out. "The land, the claim." "And I married you for security," Magnolia returned. "We both had our reasons." "Fair enough." He handed her a canteen of water, "but I think we've been fortunate in our bargain." It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging that their arrangement might be developing into something more than convenience. In town the following week, Magnolia had her first encounter with the mysterious Harlan Bates. She had gone in with Mike to purchase supplies, Preston having stayed behind to deal with a sick calf. She was selecting fabric for curtains at the general store when a tall, expensively dressed man approached her. "You must be Blackwood's new wife," he said, removing his hat to reveal silver-streaked dark hair. "Harlan Bates, madam. A pleasure to make your acquaintance." Magnolia noted the assessing look in his eyes, the calculated charm of his smile. "Mr. Bates," she acknowledged coolly. "I've heard your name mentioned." "All good things, I hope," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "though I doubt that, coming from your husband." "Preston speaks of you exactly as much as you deserve, Mr. Bates," she replied evenly. Bates chuckled. "A loyal wife, how charming." "I wonder, though, if you know exactly what you've married into. Preston Blackwood isn't the simple rancher he pretends to be." "I know my husband well enough," Magnolia said, turning back to the fabric. "Do you know about the fire?" Bates asked quietly. "The one that killed old man Blackwood's dream of claiming the North Pasture. Interesting timing, that fire, right when the final inspection was due." Magnolia stiffened. "What are you implying?" "Only that history has a way of repeating itself. Accidents happen, especially on isolated homesteads. He placed his hat back on his head. Just something to consider, Mrs. Blackwood. My offer to purchase the broken spur remains open. For the right price, you and your husband could live comfortably anywhere you choose. Before Magnolia could respond, Mike appeared at her side, his expression stormy. Everything all right here, Mrs. Blackwood? Fine, thank you, Mike, she said, not taking her eyes off Bates. Mr. Bates was just leaving. Indeed I was. Bates tipped his hat. Give my regards to your husband, Mrs. Blackwood. As he walked away, Mike growled, man's a snake. Been trying to push Preston out for years. He mentioned a fire, Magnolia said. Something about Preston's father's claim. Mike's expression darkened further. That's a sore subject, madam. Best ask Preston about it directly. The ride back to the ranch was tense, Magnolia's mind racing with questions. That evening after dinner, she found Preston in his study as usual. I met Harlan Bates today, she said without preamble. Preston's head snapped up, his expression instantly alert. What did he want? To imply that you might have had something to do with the fire that destroyed your father's homestead cabin. Preston went very still. And what did you say to that? Nothing, but I'm asking you now. She met his gaze steadily. Was there more to that fire than you told me? For a long moment, Preston just looked at her, his face unreadable. Then he sighed heavily and gestured to the chair across from him. I was 15 when it happened, he began as Magnolia sat. My father had finally gotten all the paperwork in order for the North Pasture claim. We'd been living in the cabin for almost 2 years, me, my parents, my sisters. It wasn't easy, but we were making it work. He stared down at his hands. The fire started in the middle of the night. I woke up to my mother screaming. The whole place was engulfed in minutes. We barely got out with our lives. That's terrible, Magnolia said softly. But why would Bates suggest you were responsible? Because Bates's father wanted that land too. He'd tried to buy it from my father multiple times, but my father refused to sell. After the fire, when we couldn't prove our residence and lost the claim, old man Bates swooped in to file on it. Preston's jaw tightened, but he died before he could complete the process. His son's been trying to finish what his father started ever since. You think they set the fire? I know they did. Found evidence, a broken lantern that wasn't ours, footprints leading away from the property. His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with old pain. But we couldn't prove it, and my father, the loss broke him. He never recovered. Magnolia reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. I'm sorry, Preston. He looked down at their joined hands, surprise flickering across his face. Bates thinks I'm seeking revenge, that this is all about an old grudge. He shook his head. It's not, it's about justice. About finishing what my father started. I believe you, Magnolia said simply. Something shifted in Preston's expression, a softening around his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, for not assuming the worst. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Then Preston gently withdrew his hand. It's getting late. You should get some rest. That night, lying in her bed, Magnolia found herself thinking about Preston not as her business partner in this marriage of convenience, but as a man with a painful past and a burning drive to right old wrongs. She was beginning to understand him, beginning to see the depths beneath his reserved exterior. And if she was honest with herself, she was beginning to care for him in a way that had nothing to do with their arrangement. The following Saturday, they rode out to the homestead cabin as usual. Preston had been quieter than normal since their conversation about Bates, but not unkind. If anything, he seemed more attentive, making sure Magnolia had everything she needed at the ranch, asking her opinion on ranch matters, teaching her more about the operation. The cabin was nearly complete now, with a sturdy roof, finished walls, and even glass in the windows. Today, they were to install the stove that had been delivered from town. It's really becoming a home, Magnolia observed as they worked together to position the heavy cast iron stove. That's the idea, Preston replied. Government inspector will be coming in 2 weeks. Everything needs to look established by then. And after the inspection, if we pass, Preston straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, we maintain residence here for 5 years, make improvements to the land. Then the claim is secure. 5 years, Magnolia repeated softly. It seemed both a very long time and somehow not long enough. Preston was watching her closely. I know it's not what you envisioned for your life. No, she agreed, but then nothing about my life has gone as planned lately. Do you regret it? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Coming west, our arrangement, Magnolia considered the question seriously. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. Something flickered in Preston's eyes. He took a step toward her, then stopped as the sound of approaching horses reached them. We're not expecting anyone, he said, instantly alert. Stay here. He moved to the door, hand on his holstered revolver. Magnolia followed despite his instruction, peering out the window beside him. 3 riders were approaching Harlan Bates and 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Bates, Preston muttered. What the hell does he want? He stepped out onto the newly built porch, positioning himself in front of Magnolia. That's far enough, Bates, he called as the riders drew near. Bates reined in his horse, a sleek black stallion that pranced nervously. Blackwood, he acknowledged. Mrs. Blackwood. His eyes moved over the cabin, taking in the improvements. Quite a cozy little nest you're building here. State your business, Preston said flatly. Just being neighborly, Bates replied with a thin smile. Thought I'd see how your homestead claim is progressing. Inspector's coming soon, isn't he? What's it to you? Bates shrugged elegantly. Professional interest, you might say. This parcel would round out my holdings nicely. I'm still willing to make you a generous offer for the broken spur, Blackwood, enough for you and your lovely wife to start fresh somewhere else. Not interested, Preston said. Never will be. Pity. Bates's smile disappeared. History has a way of repeating itself, as I mentioned to your wife. Isolated cabins, accidental fires, tragic really. Preston's hand tightened on his revolver. Is that a threat, Bates? Just an observation. Bates's cold eyes moved to Magnolia. Mrs. Blackwood, I do hope you've fully considered your position. Your husband's obsession with this land has already cost his family dearly. Would be a shame if history repeated itself. Mr. Bates, Magnolia said, stepping forward to stand beside Preston, I think you'll find that the Blackwoods are not so easily intimidated. Not 20 years ago, and certainly not now. Surprise flickered across Bates's face, quickly masked. As you wish, madam, but remember my words when the time comes. He tipped his hat. Good day to you both. As they rode away, Preston turned to Magnolia. You shouldn't have confronted him like that. I wasn't going to stand by while he threatened us, she replied, her heart still racing from the encounter. Preston's expression was torn between admiration and concern. Bates is dangerous, Magnolia. He doesn't make idle threats. Neither do I, she said firmly. This is our land, Preston, our home. I won't be frightened away from it, our home. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them had intended. Preston's eyes searched hers, something new and uncertain in his gaze. You mean that? About this being our home, Magnolia hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think I do, she admitted. It's become more than just an arrangement to me. Preston took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Magnolia, he began, his voice rough with emotion. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of a rifle shot. Preston reacted instantly, pulling Magnolia back into the cabin. Stay down, he ordered, drawing his revolver. What is it? She asked, crouching by the wall. Could be nothing. Could be Bates's men trying to scare us. He moved to the window, staying low. I'm going to check it out. You stay here out of sight. No, Magnolia said, surprising herself with her vehemence. We stick together. Preston looked like he wanted to argue, but another shot rang out, closer this time. Fine, he said tersely. But you do exactly as I say. They slipped out the back of the cabin and into the cover of the trees that lined the creek. Preston moved with the quiet confidence of a man used to tracking, guiding Magnolia with a hand at her elbow. They hadn't gone far when they heard voices, angry, arguing men. Told you to warn them, not shoot at them. Just firing into the air, boss, scaring them a little. Idiots, I don't want them dead, not yet, I want them gone. Preston's grip on Magnolia's arm tightened. Bates and his men, what now? She whispered. Preston's jaw was set in a hard line. Now we gather evidence. Bates has finally made a mistake. They crept closer, using the trees for cover. From their vantage point, they could see Bates and his men in a small clearing. One of the men was holding a rifle. "No more shooting," Bates was saying. "We do this my way, after dark." "Make it look like an accident." "What about the woman?" one of the men asked. "Leave her be," Bates snapped. "Just burn the cabin, they'll get the message." Preston's face had gone pale with fury. He started to move forward, but Magnolia grabbed his arm. "No," she whispered urgently. "We need to get help. We can't take on all three of them." For a moment, she thought he would ignore her. Then he nodded sharply. "You're right, we ride for town. Get the sheriff." They backed away carefully, returning to the cabin by a circuitous route. The horses were still tethered nearby, thankfully undisturbed. "We'll ride double on my horse," Preston said, quickly gathering their few belongings. "It's faster, and I don't want to risk separating." As they mounted, Magnolia's arms wrapped tightly around Preston's waist. She realized with startling clarity that sometime in the past weeks, this man had become more to her than a business partner. The thought of him facing danger made her heart clench with fear. They rode hard for town, taking a different route than the main trail to avoid running into Bates and his men. The journey seemed interminable, each cracking twig and rustle of leaves making them tense. Finally, the lights of Copper Creek appeared in the distance. They headed straight for the sheriff's office, a small building on the main street. Sheriff Tom Wilson was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, his weathered face showing little surprise at their breathless story. "Bates, eh?" he said when they'd finished. "Been wondering when he'd show his true colors. Man's been pushing the boundaries of the law for years." "Will you help us?" Preston asked. "We need witnesses if they try to burn the cabin tonight." The sheriff nodded. "I'll deputize a few men. We'll head out there and wait." "Catch them in the act." "I'm coming with you," Preston said firmly. "Me too," Magnolia added. Both men looked at her in surprise. "It's our home," she said simply. "Our fight." Preston's expression softened. "Magnolia, don't tell me it's too dangerous," she interrupted. "I've faced Harlan Bates. I've heard his threats. I have a right to see justice done." After a moment, Preston nodded. "All right, but you stay with me the whole time." The sheriff gathered 4 men he trusted, briefed them on the situation, and within an hour, they were riding back toward the homestead. The plan was simple: position themselves around the cabin and wait for Bates and his men to make their move. Dusk was falling as they reached the property. Everything looked peaceful, the cabin standing solid against the darkening sky. "No sign of them yet," the sheriff said quietly. "Good, gives us time to get in position." They tethered their horses in a hidden grove and approached the cabin on foot. The sheriff assigned positions, placing Preston and Magnolia inside the cabin itself. "If they come to burn it, they'll have to get close," he explained. "We'll let them make the first move, then catch them red-handed." As darkness fell completely, the waiting began. Inside the cabin, Preston and Magnolia sat side by side on the floor, backs against the wall, away from the windows. "I'm sorry," Preston said softly after a long silence, "for bringing you into this." Magnolia turned to look at him, his face dimly visible in the darkness. "You didn't bring me into anything. I made my choice when I agreed to marry you." "It was supposed to be a simple arrangement," he said. "A business deal, not this." "Life rarely follows our plans," she replied. "My father used to say that the measure of a person is not how they handle success, but how they face adversity." Preston's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and strong. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Magnolia said, "despite his failings." They sat in companionable silence, hands still joined, the tension of waiting tempered by the strange intimacy of the moment. "Magnolia," Preston said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we get through this, if we secure the claim, I want you to know that you're free to go if you wish." "I'll make sure you're provided for," she turned to him, surprised. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" In the dim light, she saw him shake his head slowly. "No," he admitted, "it's not what I want at all." Before she could respond, a soft whistle came from outside the sheriff's signal. Someone was approaching. Preston squeezed her hand once, then let go, moving silently to peer out the window. Magnolia joined him, heart pounding. 3 shadowy figures were moving toward the cabin from the direction of the creek. Even in the darkness, the tall, straight bearing of Harlan Bates was unmistakable. "They're coming," Preston whispered. "Stay down." The men approached cautiously, stopping just short of the cabin. In the stillness of the night, their voices carried clearly. "No lights," Bates was saying. "Looks like they've gone back to town." "Lucky for us," one of his men replied. "Makes our job easier." "Remember, make it look like an accident," Bates instructed. "A lantern tipped over maybe, nothing that can be traced back to us. And if they come back while we're doing it." There was a pause. "Then you make sure they don't interfere," Bates said coldly. "Permanently." Magnolia felt a chill run down her spine. Preston's hand found hers again, squeezing reassuringly. The men moved closer, one of them carrying what looked like a can of kerosene. They were almost at the porch steps when the sheriff's voice rang out. "That's far enough, Bates. You're under arrest," chaos erupted. Bates's men drew their weapons, firing blindly into the darkness. The sheriff and his deputies returned fire. Preston pushed Magnolia to the floor, covering her body with his own as bullets thudded into the cabin walls. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his own revolver. The gunfight was brief but intense. When it ended, one of Bates's men lay wounded on the ground, the other had fled, and Bates himself was being held at gunpoint by the sheriff. "It's over, Bates," the sheriff was saying as Preston and Magnolia cautiously emerged from the cabin. "Attempted arson, attempted murder. You'll be going away for a long time," Bates's cold eyes fixed on Preston. "This isn't over, Blackwood, not by a long shot." "Yes, it is," Preston replied evenly. "Your father tried to steal this land 20 years ago. You tried tonight. Both of you failed." As the sheriff and his men led Bates away, Magnolia found herself trembling with delayed reaction. Preston's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle with concern. She nodded, leaning into his strength. "Yes, just processing everything." They stood together in the moonlight, the cabin behind them damaged but still standing, like the beginning of something that might last. "What you said before," Magnolia began hesitantly, "about me being free to go when this is over." Preston's arm tightened slightly around her. "Yes." She looked up at him, finding the courage to say what she'd only recently admitted to herself. "I don't want to go, Preston, not anymore." His eyes searched hers, hope and uncertainty warring in their blue depths. "Why? Because this isn't just an arrangement to me anymore," she said softly. "Because somewhere along the way I started to care for you, to see the man behind the stern rancher who offered me a bargain." Preston's free hand came up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I never expected you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Never expected to find someone who would stand beside me, fight for this land as if it were her own." "It is my own," Magnolia replied. "You made it mine when you married me." "I married you for convenience," he acknowledged, "but I find myself wanting more than that now." "What do you want, Preston?" she asked, her heart beating wildly. "A real marriage," he said simply. "With you, if you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Magnolia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Preston's arms came around her, pulling her close against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a smile in his voice. "Yes," Magnolia whispered. "That's a yes." 2 weeks later, the government inspector arrived to examine the homestead claim. The cabin had been repaired, the bullet holes plastered over, and new furniture added to make it truly habitable. Magnolia had sewn curtains for the windows and planted the beginnings of a garden. The inspector, a methodical man with a clipboard and many questions, seemed satisfied with what he saw. "Living here full-time, are you?" he asked Preston as they stood on the porch. "As much as the ranch allows," Preston replied honestly. "My wife and I split our time between here and the main ranch house." The inspector nodded, making notes. "Improvements to the land." Preston showed him the fencing they'd begun, the cleared areas for planting, the plans for expanding the cabin as their family grew. "Family, eh?" the inspector said, glancing at Magnolia. "Planning on children?" Magnolia felt her cheeks warm. "Yes," she said, meeting Preston's eyes. "We are." It wasn't something they'd discussed explicitly, But in the past 2 weeks, as their marriage had transformed from a business arrangement into a real partnership, the future had begun to take shape in both their minds. "Well, everything seems to be in order," the inspector said finally. "I'll file my report recommending approval of your claim. Barring any complications, the North Pasture will be officially recognized as Blackwood property in 5 years' time, assuming you maintain residence and continue improvements." "We will," Preston said firmly, his hand finding Magnolia's. That evening, as they prepared to ride back to the main ranch, Magnolia took one last look at the cabin. It was still rough around the edges, still a work in progress much like their marriage. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I never expected to find a home here," she said honestly. "When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was leaving everything behind. I never imagined I might find something better." Preston's arms came around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Is it better?" "This hard life, this wild country," Magnolia leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of him at her back. "It is with you," she said simply. "We make it better together." He turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I love you, Magnolia Blackwood. Not for the convenience, not for the claim, but for who you are, for the courage that brought you west, for the strength that keeps you fighting, for the heart that somehow found room for me." Tears pricked at Magnolia's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "My cowboy who offered me a job only if I'd marry him by sunset." Preston laughed, the sound rich and free in a way she'd never heard before. "Best bargain I ever made," he said, before lowering his lips to hers. As the sun set over the North Pasture, painting the land in gold and promise, Magnolia knew that what had begun as desperation had transformed into something precious and rare, a love as vast and enduring as the western sky, a home built not just of timber and nails, but of shared dreams and joined hearts. 5 years later, Preston stood on the porch of the homestead cabin, watching as their 3-year-old son, Paul, chased butterflies in the garden Magnolia had cultivated into a riot of color and fragrance. The North Pasture stretched out before him, officially Blackwood land at last, the deed secured in the county records office just that morning. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Magnolia asked, coming to stand beside him, their infant daughter cradled in her arms. "Thinking about how much has changed," he replied, putting his arm around her. 5 years ago, you rode into my life asking for a job, and I made the most outrageous proposal of my life. And I accepted," she laughed. "What does that say about me?" "That you're either very brave or very foolish," he teased, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Or perhaps just desperate enough to take a chance on a stranger." "The best chance I ever took," Magnolia said softly. "Look what it gave us." She gestured to their son, to the baby in her arms, to the thriving homestead that had grown from a simple cabin into a proper home, with additions built as their family expanded. The Broken Spur Ranch had prospered too, with Magnolia's keen business sense complementing Preston's knowledge of the land. They had paid off old debts, expanded their herds, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Harlan Bates was long gone, serving a prison sentence for his crimes. The threat he had represented was just a memory now, a shadow dispelled by the bright reality of their life together. "What shall we do to celebrate?" Preston asked, watching as Paul finally caught a butterfly, his small face alight with wonder as it rested briefly on his palm before fluttering away. "I was thinking," Magnolia said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "that we might have a proper wedding, a renewal of vows." Preston raised an eyebrow. "You weren't satisfied with our first ceremony, the hasty words in front of a bored judge." "It served its purpose," she acknowledged. "But I thought perhaps we deserve something more, something that celebrates not what brought us together but what kept us together." Preston turned to face her fully, taking in the woman who had transformed his life, her honey-brown hair touched with gold in the sunlight, her hazel eyes wise and loving, the quiet confidence she carried like a mantle. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. "Though I should warn you, I intend to say the same words I said 5 years ago." "Oh," Magnolia's eyes danced with amusement. "You're going to propose marriage only if I'll have you by sunset. No, Preston said, his voice dropping to a tender murmur. I'm going to promise to love you for the rest of my days, to build a life worthy of your courage, to never take for granted the gift you gave me when you said yes. Magnolia's eyes filled with tears. Those weren't the words you said 5 years ago. They were the words in my heart, Preston replied, even if I didn't know it yet. Paul came running up the porch steps then, breaking the moment with his exuberant energy. Papa, I saw a real big butterfly. It was blue. Preston scooped him up, settling the boy on his hip. Did you now? As big as you? No, Paul giggled. Not that big. Magnolia watched them, her heart full to bursting. From the desperate young woman who had arrived in Arizona with nothing but hope and determination, to the wife, mother, and partner she had become, the journey had been unexpected, challenging, and more rewarding than she could have imagined. What are you thinking now? Preston asked, catching her gaze over their son's head. That sometimes the most outrageous proposals lead to the most beautiful lives, she replied, and that I would say yes all over again, even knowing how hard the path would be. So would I, Preston said softly, every time. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the north pasture in shades of gold and amber, the Blackwood family stood together on the porch of the home they had built not just with timber and nails, but with courage, perseverance, and a love that had begun as a bargain and grown into a legacy.